So, what is mysticism? Mysticism, at its core, is a intimate, direct connection with the divine. Often we are conditioned to not see the divine, to rather see the divine through intermediaries, through these bridges, people who are in between us and God, or us and the sacred. This is why in human society there often emerges a kind of priest class, a kind of collection of people, institutions who are given the social role of communicating truth. And, the church came to occupy this role. We learn to associate God with a particular building, a particular person, dressed in ceremonial attire to convey a certain image of divinity. In a way, we come to worship idols as opposed to reality itself. Now, the mystic comes to see that God or divinity is an ever present reality in everything, in existence itself, in your hands, in your speech, the trees, the air, the flowers, everything that around you. God is never absent. It's a contradiction because God comes to be existence itself. There's a image I found which sort of, and I'll edit it into the video here, which conveys this idea of seeing God everywhere in all the forms and expressions of reality. And importantly, when you have this sort of outlook of seeing divinity in everything, even the more ugly aspects of reality, in evil, perhaps, which is often difficult for people to fully comprehend. The question of where is God, where is divinity in the experience of profound suffering and evil. When we come to see divinity as the animating intelligence behind the entire play of creation, we come to recognize our own self-evident divinity. The idea that we are not these organisms, these life forms, these humans who are ostracized and separated from God. Rather, we see ourselves as co-creating with God, as participants, as children of his or her or its creation, if you wish to transcend the often the gendered terminology we often ascribe to God and divinity. And when we see ourselves as participants in divinity, we see the mystique, the mystery and the wonder of our own existence, of our own intelligence, the force which beats our heart, which produces our speech, which gives us vision. We come across this sort of insatiable curiosity, this insatiable delight for what is in front of you. And when you reach this place, this state of, unity consciousness, a non-dual state of awareness where no longer do you see yourself as separate from the world, but as fully enmeshed, a pattern within a sea of patterns. You fully shed through all the the narratives, the forms of conditioning which seek to shrink our being, to obscure us from realizing this truth. Now, much of society works on the principle of separation, and separation is a precondition for control. Because when we think of ourselves as separate beings and not divinity, uh, we succumb to a lot of oppressive structures, oppressive conditions. If we see ourselves as a slave, we'll accept slavery. If we see ourselves as divinity, as an expression of divinity, then we will not put up for such things. And as well, when we have the outlook that something beyond us, something is external to us and is not us, perhaps we may call it a lesser being, that perception of separation facilitates a lot of harm to be inflicted on the other. Because we mistakenly believe that we are harming someone who is not us. And think of all the wars, the conflict, the genocides, which are sort of perpetuated based upon this othering, this us-theming, which is a recurrent feature of human tribalism, obviously. This tendency to not see the unity in all of creation, but to box it into categories and concepts, and to identify yourself with a certain limiting concept. People, particularly in the West, are encouraged to identify with the labels of race, gender, sexuality, all sorts of stuff. It's almost like people accessorize themselves with identities and categories. They box themselves into it with these boxes of intersectionality, which is to the mystic an absurd thing. It's identification of the ego with concepts. The mystic who has sort of transcended the ego, if not for a fleeting moment, understands that the root of nature is silence, is silent being. But even that doesn't suffice. The words silent being is the closest approximation with words. It's this silent source of being which unifies all the expressions of nature. Separation only seems to arise as an illusion when our mind becomes noisy, and we start nattering to ourselves these monologues of concepts and identities. I am this, I am that, I am not this, I am not that. I am this human of this particular age, and these various personas. We fall so deeply into the mask of our personas that we forget who we are prior to the mask. Society is this sort of play of masks and personas, really. When I speak into this video camera, or phone rather, I suppose subconsciously I'm assuming a certain persona. But I suppose I have one foot in this persona and one foot out, because there is that awareness of the present moment, I suppose, of that awareness of existence. And I'm aware of this fundamental uncertainty to the next thing that I'm going to say. That's the nature of the flow. You're surfing with the moment. And my whole approach with these sort of freely riffing videos is to surf with that moment, surf with the inspiration of whatever will come, will come. That's very much how all my ideas are generated. I mean, I use the word my ideas very tentatively, because I do not take possession of these ideas, really. There's an emptying, a spaciousness that is cultivated in order to become a receptacle, a vessel for expression. Where are the ideas, really? They're not spatially located. They're not in here. They're not out there. They're just energy, maybe. They come and go, and I just speak them, I suppose. I give them the reality of concepts to allow for communication. But to come back to the origin of this video, which is about mysticism, and what it is exactly, is that mysticism is the understanding of a reality that essentially transcends concepts, which transcends the word, which transcends this sort of categorization and analytical way of mental processing. This idea of living in our head. Now, living in our head is a state where our attention and the circulation of energy within our experience, in our consciousness, is kind of blocked and very much strongly attracted to here, kind of this very tense analytical way of being. People often talk about being dissociated from their bodies, not really fully sensing what is going on in their body, in their torso, their legs, and their limbs, their extremities, because all their conscious energy is recirculating and ruminating up here. And this is one way of being in the world. It's not the most peaceful or blissful way of being. It's really a way of being where you are constantly analyzing the future and the past. You think that in order to engage in life, you have to be constantly evaluating every optionality with this sort of internal, mental, often verbal processing. We think, what do I need to do next? What went bad about that moment? You ruminate on past events, past memories. They really bleed into the moment and they capture your awareness, and you have this tendency to just circle on the same spot over and over again. And you can tell who is sort of stuck in this way to this stage of being, because there's a kind of tension in their expression. Maybe they furrow their brows and they don't look really comfortable. They don't look relaxed because, sorry, I just knocked my camera. Because they're really tortured by concepts. They become lost in the concepts and thereby they become obscured and dissociated from this sort of mystical state of awareness, which by its nature transcends the concepts of the mind. So I suppose one who is sort of still within this mode of being, this mode of analytical being, they may ask, well, how do I enter into this sort of mystical state of awareness? And we should notice the framing of this desire, the framing of acquiring this mystical state as a kind of problem that has to be solved by certain actions or mental processes. We think we have to do something to realize this mystical state. Now, of course, it can be helpful to frame it in this sort of way. There are actions, there are habits, there are activities that can help. Meditation for one, presence, stillness, silence. They can help, but they are not the thing itself. We should understand that they are potential vehicles towards realizing the state, but we should understand that the mystical state of awareness is ever present. You already have it, but the realization is like a sky that becomes sort of obscured by clouds. The clouds are your concepts, your ruminative mental patterns, your thoughts, all the things that bother you, all the things that you desire and want, and all the distractions that you have. And you can think of a distraction as anything that takes you out of this moment into thinking about the past or the future, or think about anything other than experience itself. Now, experience itself is a flow state, or it is a flow, or it just is. I want you to be conscious of the fact that each word that I use is a pointer. It should point you to this thing which you've experienced as well. You know it intimately by your own experience. You shouldn't get lost in the thoughts, in the words. You should see the words as a car taking you to the destination, but you have to get out the car eventually when you reach the destination. You shouldn't just, you can't drive to the destination and stay in the car, and then drive to another destination and think, oh yeah, I reached that point. No, you have to step out the car. The car is your concepts. You have to step out of your concepts. And you have to ask yourself, what is life like when I'm not mentally processing all the time, when I'm not speaking in my head all the time, when I'm not analyzing everything? What is that like? Now, I don't wish to condemn mental processes and concepts. They are deeply important. They have practical use. But I think we can all benefit, particularly the Western mind, the mind that is, almost conditioned to want and control reality, the sort of domination of the ego. That form of conditioned mind can benefit from simplifying their conceptual processes and returning to more simpler ways of being, perhaps more childlike ways of being. Because a child, they're not tortured by concepts. They're able to be free, they're able to play, and to sort of lose themselves in the drama and the fun of life. When our consciousness becomes so suffocated with concepts and obligations and fears, anxieties, and worries about what to do, they lose that childlike innocence, that childlike freedom of really relishing in the bliss of life. Perhaps this is why many adults enjoy video games so much, because video games take them back into that childlike state of play, of just enjoying. Now, of course, video games can spiral into addictions and dependencies, and that can become issues for people when they become so consumed with play that they, you know, forget everything else that is there to be lived. Their life becomes unbalanced. But if we can maintain balance, maintain the middle way, then we can understand that balance between play and work. And in fact, work can become a form of play. It all depends on what sort of conceptual associations we have with the notion of play and the notion of work. Often in society, we are conditioned into valuing work and thinking of work as this tedious task, and play as this sort of frivolous and play as this frivolous and immature thing that just kids do. But you're not allowed to play when you're an adult. I reject such things. I think play, it can be frivolous, but it can also be quite serious and important and a significant aspect of life itself. But yeah, I think I'll leave that somewhat there because I'm reaching the 20-minute mark. But I'm also reaching the end of my stream of consciousness, of ideas generating. But I hope that's been interesting, insightful. Have you even enjoyed it? This little riffy riff. But anyways, yeah. I think to sort of conclude, we should look upon play as a kind of mystical state. Because when I reflect on when I'm lost in play, I'm lost in the moment, really. There is no rigid analytical process going on, particularly in the past when I used to play lots of football and other sports and stuff. Um, you're there, you're attending to the world, and it's this deep engagement, a deep concentration that isn't tiresome. It's enjoyable. It's an enjoyable kind of hyper focus. But yeah, I'll leave that at that. Goodbye.